Thank you for watching this demo of the OCCUPYology board game, version 1v99.1. OCCUPYology is an educational game with an opinion, but without a party, and you won't find it for sale here, because it's an independently produced, not-for-profit game made in the USA. It was inspired by Occupy protests, the 99% and American Spring movements, and a game of class warfare that you've been playing and losing your whole life. To win, you'll need to study the game, change the rules, and occupy the world one space at a time. To prepare, clear your mind of what you've come to expect from money-based board games in this money-based life. Log out of Facebook and log in some real face time with friends and family who may have different political views and/or bad breath. Set that aside for now and use the tools in this box to encourage them to think outside the corporate box. It's a fun way to get liberals, moderates, and conservatives talking about the real issues negatively impacting their lives instead of debating media-contrived talking points, and to focus their attention on what the fat cat was stealing from them while they were preoccupied. In less time than it might take to watch a movie, you can play out your country's problems using little wooden pieces, a pair of dice, and a demand for legislative action. And if you don't agree with a bill, you can amend it. The important thing is to exercise your democracy and have fun. Now we're ready to begin. The game board illustrates the story of a war never declared, fiercely denied, yet silently raging out of control all around you on the streets of New York and Washington, D.C. and Main Street, USA. In a Twilight Zone kind of town, like Willoughby, where once a man could slow down and live his life full measure. Now the factories are closed, the bridge is falling apart, and if you can find a job, you work harder and longer for less. It's a push-push world, bar-coded, trademarked, and ruled by corporate gods with the help of those who worship them. But across the bridge, an uprising has begun in a small oasis of trees and benches in the middle of a concrete jungle called Manhattan. And it's about to become ground zero of the nation's most important revolution since its first. Only this time there will be no rocket's red glare. This battle will be fought with numbers. Numbers with dollar signs and numbers that occupy space. And each space tells another piece of the story. Wall Street is a space the fat cat calls home. But if Jesus walked onto the floor of the stock exchange, he'd likely call it a den of thieves and cast out the money changers. The media industry is 6 mega media conglomerates controlling 90% of what you read, watch, and listen to, and shaping the news to serve their interests and those of their sponsors. The banking industry tips the balance of power and wealth to the 1%, who buy lobbyists on K Street who stuff ballot boxes with overpowering campaign contributions, with the help of recent decisions by the Supreme Court. And that effectively results in the offices of Congress and President being sold to the highest bidders. Protesting on the wildcard space can help the lower classes get the upper hand. Education is a path to power if you can afford the tuition. The fate of the planet may depend on what you eat. It will take a revolutionary new approach to solve our energy problems. And Labor Day sales have marked down employee paydays to record lows, even though corporate profits are at all-time highs. At the same time, the 1% uses the police as a tool to suppress the 99%, and the Pentagon as a tool to advance their business interests overseas while the 99% pays the price. And the healthcare industry is more about money than health and care, and both will be needed in abundance to bring Main Street back to life. OCCUPYology is a 4-player game. One player represents 1% of the population, the other 99% is represented by 3 players. Though it doesn't take much to see that the problems of 3 little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world, your challenge is to make the 1% understand that the problems of 99% of the people do matter very much. And if you can occupy 7 spaces that shift the balance of power from the few to the many, everybody wins. So let's get started. Zuccotti Park is a nice place to sit, but it's time to pick up your pawn and roll. 1 or 2 dice at the same time and move that number of spaces on the outer level of the board. So let's say green rolls a total of 3, lands on a vacant media industry space, and builds a small business there by paying the bank and marking it with a small building. Red rolls 1 die, and it makes them a customer on a big business media space owned by the 1%. Now, if you land on a small business, you're charged a fair price for their product or service and money would recycle back into the community. But you pay more on the big business space because your bill includes a share of the long-term hidden costs of them shipping jobs and factories overseas, driving down wages and benefits, cost-cutting on product safety and environmental protections, etc. Next, Orange rolls 9 and lands on the vote space, but you can't vote on the first round. Now the 1% player moves the fat cat, and they can ride in a limo or go twice as far in their corporate jet. So if they roll 2, they could move 2 spaces or 4. 4 lands them on a business they already own, allowing them to expand it with another big building. Skyscraper style if they like. And that doubles their profit and your hidden fees. And if the 1% had a monopoly of all the spaces in the media industry, they price gouge you and your bill is tripled. Now, if that bankrupts you, you must relocate to the bridge and spend your turns walking around Main Street until an opportunity arises. But until you push legislation for a free community college or green jobs on Main Street, your only income option is to roll into the military and stay there until you roll a 5 or 6. And then roll a 5 or 6 to get out of the hospital if the 1% landed on the Pentagon space and manipulated the country into war. And that adds a war tax you'll have to pay the 1% on payday to build missiles and repair foreign cities they destroy. And if you protest any of that, you may have to go to jail to get your mind right. And that's how the 1% wins. When all 99% activists are either broke on Main Street or in the hospital, military, or jail. But for now, let's say you roll a 6, you're released from the military with 2 years' pay, and you vow to fight the war on inequity and injustice so that as God is your witness, you will never be hungry again. Politician pawns in the office of the House, Senate, and President are under the control of the 1%. To replace them, land your 99 on the vote space and nominate a 99% candidate. For example, I land on vote, pick the green candidate, say something complimentary, and place them on the office of the House. That starts an election. The 1% player can now use turns to roll the 1% politician around the board collecting campaign contributions on big business spaces. If they landed on this space with 2 big buildings, they could place a double donation under the vote space. The 1% politician wins re-election if they raise enough money power. The challenger wins with people power if another 99 lands on the vote space before then. In that case, swear the 99% candidate in and swear the 1% politician out with a few choice words. To push legislation forward, you need an Occupy protest of 2 99s on one space. It can start with one player refusing to move off a space like Rosa Parks did in 1955. For example, you're on the banking space and it's your turn to roll, but instead you pull out the banking card to protest their predatory lending, mortgage fraud, fake signatures, gambling with clients' deposits, selling securities they bet against, money laundering, cooking the books, credit card fee and interest gouging, paying CEO bonuses, bailout money, fueling a global economic meltdown, and buying elections and laws to allow it all. Instead of going after the corporate criminals, however, the police car is moved by the 1% to arrest you for loitering, but their roll falls short. The orange player rolls 3, and together you occupy the space, accidentally blocking all traffic from rolling past as you chant, "If the 99% can't move forward, no one can." Now, if the 1% rolls 2 next turn, the police car will escort one of you to jail, unless you attempt to passively resist arrest. But it is risky. If you roll a 6 before the officer does, you get off with a warning after reminding him of the 1%'s war on his union, Social Security, democracy, etc. If he rolls a 6, what we've got here is a failure to communicate, resolved with a police baton and a trip to the hospital. As soon as the second occupier joins a protest, they can try to pass a reform bill in the House, Senate, and President's office by rolling higher than the 1%. Your newly elected 99% candidate gives you majority control of the House, so it passes there. Ring the Liberty Bell and advance it to the next office. In the Senate, you fail to win the debate because the flipping supermajority rule requires you to roll 2 higher and your turn ends. You can try again next turn. But the longer it takes, the more time the 1% has to drive the police to break up the protest driving the bill. If the bill passes all 3 offices, read the bill and ask if any player would like to amend it. If so, call for a majority yea or nay vote. Otherwise, say, "This bill has passed," and slide the card under the space to mark it as one of the 7 needed to end corporate rule. The bill has the effect of leveling the playing field. It reduces the number of big buildings in the industry to 1 and initiates other changes related to that space. For example, a successful Occupy on the Senate lawn leads to the end of the flipping filibuster and supermajority rule that the 1% relies on to block change in the Senate. News events are read when players land on any media space. You will be shocked to find gambling taking place on the Wall Street space. You can protest remotely from the wildcard space, hunt down corporate criminals with Agent 99, and if you've earned the most medals, a statue will be built for you with a plaque that reads, "In 1776, Washington freed America of British rule. On this day, you freed America of corporate rule." As a last resort, the 1% can invoke the nuclear option card. It's a real scary game changer. For the 99%, the fastest path to winning is ending the power of money over elections. That happens by occupying the Supreme Court to change election laws, or by staging an American spring parade to amend the Constitution. When the game ends, turn over the board and invite players to sign up for real action on election reform. Because money doesn't talk, people do. Money needs to pay the bills and shut the f*** up. For more details, visit OCCUPYology.com and join the discussion to change future versions of the game. And stop arguing with friends and family. Play with them, and then play it forward, 4 players at a time. Oh, and if you need a gimmick to get someone to watch this, tell them it's a clip of a fat cat running amok.